Hello, my name is Ashley Avila Cuevas, and this is a look into multilingual education, a case study by yours truly. For the background and setting, as a bilingual person, I've had to learn how to navigate through life with the privilege of being fluent in two languages. Spanish was my first language, as it is the native language of my parents, who are both from Mexico. Very soon after, I was introduced to a language that was foreign to me, as it was very different from what I had known previously. My dad was the one who introduced me to the English language since he learned it and had been practicing it since he came to this country. I was also within years of being enrolled in a school where every kid around me was going to be speaking English, so with the thought of not wanting me to be excluded or even made fun of, my dad took it upon himself to teach me English while also assisting my mother with teaching me Spanish. All of this learning of two languages um, came to be well before I enrolled in preschool, which was at the age of 4. I had the opportunity and privilege to learn my two languages at a young age with the help of my parents, but I saw firsthand that this isn't the case for a lot of people. In this case, these people are the students of Oakland International High School. So through this case study, I aim to explore their experiences. More specifically, I aim to investigate how the classroom activities and participation play a role in the instances that the students use their home languages versus English, their second language. I would also like to take a dive into the complexity and importance of a bilingual education and how it serves as a tool to help students bridge together their multiple identities and expand on their discourses. Now, on to my research questions. The first one that I have is, how is translanguaging used within the classroom as a tool to bridge together the multiple identities of a student? And second, how does comfort play a role in which language a student chooses to use when speaking to their peers and to their teachers? Now, on to my theoretical framework. Learning a language and the identities that result from that isn't something that is exclusive to occur just within the classroom. They are something that are formed and shaped by any of all the life experiences that one person can encounter. Here's where I believe that James Gee and the concept of a discourse can come into play. In his article titled "What is Literacy?", he defines a discourse as a socially accepted association among ways of using language, of thinking, and of acting that can be used to identify oneself as a member of a socially meaningful group or social network. A primary discourse would then be one that is subconsciously acquired or not actively learned. A secondary discourse is one that would have to involve interactions with social institutions that you aren't necessarily familiar with. A secondary discourse is just an extension of a primary discourse, so they go hand in hand with each other. Gee then continues to explain how it can sometimes be difficult for students that aren't considered quote unquote mainstream to obtain these secondary discourses that are dominant, since they aren't usually exposed to environments where they would be able to acquire these. The usual settings where this type of acquisition could occur is described by Gee as not likely to be in traditional classroom settings, but rather natural and functional environments, which may or may not happen to be inside of the classroom or inside of a school. And that is why these students would have to engage in learning these secondary discourses once they arrive at school. Now the concepts of translanguaging and code switching come into play. A new language can be labeled as a secondary discourse because it is something that you acquire subconsciously at an institution. The student's home language would then be labeled as the primary discourse, since it is acquired at home in an intimate setting that led it to shaping core values and identities. As outlined by Professor Lee Wei in his essay titled Translanguaging, he first defines code switching as paying more attention to the structural differences between named languages, with an analysis starting with identifying the languages involved and what they are. On the other hand, translanguaging regards the concept of named languages like English as sociopolitical and highlights the human capacity to transcend the boundaries between these languages in meaning making. It also puts an emphasis on the fact that humans are able to deliberately break the boundaries of named languages to create novel ways of expression and communication, and bilingual puns, literary artistic works, as well as everyday social interaction. When you're still learning a language, like in the case of the students in Teachers A's classroom, they are doing more code switching than translanguaging between their home language and English, since they haven't mastered the ability to do the seamless transition between them both. Now, on to the methods, more specifically taking a look at my field site. As a general overview, I conducted my fieldwork at Oakland International High School, which sits in a quiet residential area within Oakland's Temescal neighborhood. The campus is home to around 400 students who all originate from 35 different countries. All of the students attending Oakland International High School are considered to be English learners as they have immigrated to the United States in the last 4 years. Um, the students are divided by grade and also by literacy level into literacy level within their grade into their core classes like math, history, reading, etc., and are taught by a small group of teachers. After each quarter, the students rotate schedules, which allows for them to be exposed to more teachers along with different teaching styles while remaining under the same curriculum. I joined on the last day of the quarter for my reading class, so I worked with one group of students one day, and then when I came back the following week, it was a whole new cohort of students, but I stayed with them throughout the whole rest of the quarter. And then for my second class, I started working with them once the quarter had already started, so there was no difference there for me. The high school runs on an immersive English program, so all the classes are being taught in English, but some teachers choose to have classroom aides that speak other languages as well. Now, for more about my time at the field site, I attended the high school twice a week for one class period each day, lasting an hour and 15 minutes over the span of 9 weeks from the end of February to the beginning of May. On Tuesdays, I assisted in Teacher A's 6th period English class, and then I assisted in Teacher B's class, which was an elective psychology class, on Thursdays. The focus of this case study is on Teacher A, so she's going to be the only one that is only mentioned throughout this whole thing. So just to keep that in mind. Excuse me. The classes operate on the same schedule every day with very little deviation, and the classes typically would have the students working independently on a beginning of class activity called the Do Now, which would then be followed by a whole class discussion. And then afterwards, the teacher would transition the class into a dialogue activity where the students would practice certain dialogue questions with each other. And then the majority of the rest of the class period was spent going through a rotation through 3 stations with different activities for them to do in each station. My task was usually to run one of the stations and make sure that the students were completing their task and that I was available for them if they needed any help. Now onto my field notes and my codes. Throughout my time at the high school, I collected a series of 6 ethnographic field notes, the structure consisting of a broad overview of that day, a focused observation of a specific event that occurred on that day, and lastly, a discussion/analysis section where the focused observation would be connected to a key course concept. These field notes were usually written over the span of a couple of days following the volunteering session, and they were written entirely from memory. And then once this concept was introduced to me, I coded my field notes in an attempt to reveal any patterns that may have been present. I was able to come up with 3 deductive codes, being multimodality, code switching, and translanguaging, and then 4 inductive codes, which were vulnerability, confidence, or lack thereof, and then teacher guidance, the use of different tools, and the use of different tools. And with these, I was able to better analyze the classroom practices and trends and see how they connected to the broader course themes. Next. Come on. Why isn't it working? Apologies. Okay, now to my findings and discussion. The first finding, language, which I guess labeled as language as an identity. One of the first things that I noticed when I arrived at the high school was the presence of languages other than English among the student population and even the teachers. Since the majority of the students came from Spanish-speaking countries, mostly being in Central America, Spanish was the language that that I heard being spoken the most. And then I also noticed that teachers and administrators knew a second language, which again tended to be Spanish. The reason for that being unknown, but I'm sure attributed to many different factors, like the geographical location of the high school. When students would be interacting with themselves and speaking their home language, that language was again shown to be Spanish. And since I'm fluent in Spanish myself, with it being my first language, I always felt a sense of belonging, even if I was just labeled as a volunteer. In the last couple of weeks that I was volunteering in Teacher A's classroom, I had walked in the classroom before the start of the period and I noticed a new face. Once it came for class to start, she told me that the student, let's call him Franklin, was new and had just enrolled in school. She also told me that students enrolling throughout the year, even if it was towards the end, was a regular occurrence. Once the rest of the class was done with the beginning activity, the do now, she went up to Franklin, who had a serious, or what I interpreted to be a deer in the headlights look on his face, and explained the instructions for the dialogue activity um, to him, as well as introducing him and I. She gave him the spiel about me being a volunteer from UC Berkeley, which he was taking in with the same look on his face, and it wasn't until she told him that I also spoke Spanish that the expression on his face changed. It changed from stern, serious, and overwhelmed to a more soft and relaxed and even happy look. Not only that, but I noticed that his whole demeanor changed. In the beginning of the class, when he was waiting for class to start, his body language was very close off. His hands crossed across his chest, and he was leaning onto the desk like this, almost like having his head down. But when he came over to sit next to me so that we could do the activity together, his body language was more open. He was laughing, he was making jokes, he was more talkative, and he was more engaged in the activity with me. I felt that this instance was a good example of language being seen as an identity, because it is often something that we use to connect with people that we meet in the same way that we use hobbies or even basic familial data. I was able to use the fact that I speak Spanish as something to begin to use to form that connection between him and I. My ability to translanguage between both English and Spanish was also able to be used as a tool to bridge aspects of our identities together. The activity we were participating in was done in English, so we would be doing it in English, but then I would occasionally switch between the two languages so that I could explain it to him in Spanish, gauge his understanding to provide any necessary clarification, and then help us move forward with the activity. Here, I would also say that is where comfort comes into play in determining which language Franklin uses when speaking to me. From what I gathered, I could tell that he felt more comfortable speaking in Spanish with me because he had established that we shared that aspect of our identities with each other. I could also tell that he felt comfortable speaking and practicing his English with me because although he mainly communicated in Spanish with me like during the activity, he still made sure that he was pronouncing everything correctly and that he was understanding what the activity was asking him to do. The second finding, I kind of labeled it as multilingual education and its impact. Again, this concept was most apparent during Teacher A's class as well. On this particular day, Teacher A didn't have a station for me to run since the students were behind on some work, so those two stations were just going to be them working independently and then them going to the Teacher A to work on their reading skills. She tasked me with completing translations for the new vocabulary words that she was going to be introducing to the students.